structure of the global economy is changing. The question is, does it change peacefully or will it end in war? So my bottom line is that over the next couple of years, we will have brief periods of rising tensions, which will unsettle financial markets. By the time we get into 2028, there is a large risk that the growing tension between the West, led by America, and the BRICS group of nations will actually break out into war. Because should the BRICS group of nations solidify into a working entity, that group risks taking America off its hegemonic pedestal. What does this mean for financial markets? I think that over the coming 6 odd months, reality will dawn that America's economy is not as robust as it is being made out to be, and that with some short-term escalation in geopolitics, we will see a big correction in global equity markets led by America, where we would see, in round numbers, 20% coming off the S&P and 40% in the FANGs. What brings us out will be the release of Trump's animal spirits in the form of tax cuts, deregulation, accompanied by monetary stimuli amongst global central banks, as well as fiscal policies outside America. That will lead us into 2 odd years of strong recovery in business activity, in equity markets, but accompanied by rising inflation. To an extent, we will probably see a repeat of what was experienced in the 1970s and early 1980s. And that situation is already tracking very well. It means that US CPI hits around 13%. What does that do to long-term bond yields? And what does that then do to America and the global economy? I would say medium term good, short term causes friction. You're making a major change. When you have a major change, you always have conflict. But he's setting the path for America to be on the right road, and that is good for America and hopefully for the world. But that also depends on how he negotiates with other countries. If Trump entered into a bad relationship with China by imposing serious tariffs and sanctions, China has the ability to retaliate. Look at the long list of critical materials, let alone manufactured goods, that China could stop sending to America. If that happened, America's industrial military machinery would grind to a halt and much of the country's manufacturing system. Then look at the other side. Musk has his gigafactory in Shanghai. He is very close to Premier Li. Is he then going to be the intermediary between the two presidents? And he doesn't want to see serious sanctions being imposed on China because his gigafactory accounts for half of his EV global sales. From Trump's point of view, maybe he would like to establish a dual relationship that makes China and America the 2 powerhouses of the world. But to do that, he has to break the relationship between Russia and China, and between China and Iran and India. My take is that those relationships are almost inviolate, and I think the attempt to split the BRICS group of nations will fail because the relationship, particularly between China and Russia, is so strong because both countries know that if one fails, the other is the direct target by America. They have gone a long way into starting the establishment of an alternative system to the one that America has dominated since 1946. and which has created wars across the world. The BRICS group, which is growing with partnerships being formed, are absolutely determined not to be so dominated in the future. By the early next year, that's when inflation will start rising sharply. One of the drivers of inflation are going to be food prices due to two weather cycles that will start either end this year or early next. One is the Beaufort cold water cycle, which is a bunch of cold water is trapped around Greenland. It starts getting released into the Atlantic. That brings your ocean temperatures down. And the second is the Beaufort cycle, which 89 years ago created the US Midwest Dust Bowl. So we're going to have external shocks that are going to create food shortages in many parts of the world and soaring food prices. Buy all the dips and hold. Why do I say that? There's increasing evidence that central banks are diversifying out of dollars and euros, etc., and buying physical gold. The big driver, in my view, is what's going on in China. China's citizens and institutions own something around 25,000 tons of gold, which has been bought directly off the Shanghai Gold Exchange. It would not surprise me if one day China announces that its currency is supported by the gold which its citizens own, and they will state a number. On top of that, China's various ministries, in addition to the PBOC, have something around another 25,000 tons, all of which has been imported since the stats go back to the early 1950s. Now, whatever the PLA imports is never reported in customs data. I had a friend who did a lot of business in China, and he told me one day that he had to know a lot of different people at senior levels, one of which was a senior general, who invited him down to headquarters. They went to a large warehouse, and there stacked from floor to ceiling were bars of gold, just to confirm the statistics that you can actually piece together. So, continuing with that theme, Russia holds much more gold than they announce. It's held in the company which sits over the central bank. So Russia's real gold reserves are north of 12,000 tons. The one that is not being focused on enough that could upset the apple cart is what's going on in Syria, because you have a government run by a bunch of thugs, HTS, supported by Turkey, America, and Israel. Turkey has got its own ambitions, which is to recreate the Ottoman Empire that existed in the Middle East and North Africa. If they pursue that ambition, it puts Turkey at loggerheads not only with Israel, but with America. Where does that lead us? Turkey is a member of NATO. Go back to when Assad fell. Iran and Russia quite deliberately did not support Assad in the final months because they told him what was going to happen and they allowed it to happen. Before Assad fell, the Syrian army's crack brigade shifted into Iraq. It's quite likely that the HTS government will fail, and at that moment, Iran, Russia, supported by Turkey, will retake Syria. Trump will stop funding and arms shipments into Ukraine. That means the collapse of Ukraine's military. It means then Putin will control not just the eastern part, but the western part too. It's at that stage you have a de facto ceasefire, because Ukraine has capitulated. What it also means, NATO has been defeated. Is that not what Trump actually wants? Because what is he doing? He's building up Fortress America. That's the easy part, but there is one winner, which is Russia. Then the difficult part starts, is negotiating the future. And Putin's terms are probably unacceptable to Trump. So how much can Trump give without offending anti-Russian hawks? What does the world really depend on for human society and industry to operate? It's energy, it's oil. It's all very well to say to the world that I'm going to give you cheap oil, $45 odd. Well, what's the cost price of new Permian Basin production? What is the cost price? What does Saudi Arabia need? Not 45. If you get oil prices down below 60 for any length of time, are they not going to be selling US treasuries to finance their deficits?